Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and you guys all know why you're here. You are here to see me reveal 3 new cards for the Naval Warfare expansion that is coming for cards June 18th, as you can see on your screen. But before we jump straight into that, just in case, this is the first time you're hearing about Naval Warfare, I'm going to do a very quick run through, and then we'll get into the cards, so don't worry. So, Naval Warfare is a new card coming out for cards on June 18th, as I mentioned. It has about 90 cards, give or take, and it's bringing in a few new mechanics and several new archetypes for several different nations, and I have covered a lot of the cards that have been revealed already on my channel, so check out the other videos and subscribe if you haven't already to see the upcoming videos on the remaining cards that are being revealed. But what we're talking about here today is 3 cards that I am getting to reveal for the first time to all of you. So these are cards that aren't on the Discord or anything like that. This is a exclusive first look at these cards. So I know y'all are probably quite excited for that, so I'm not going to spend too long rambling in this intro. Let's just roll the intro video and get into the cards.
What a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alrighty, so like usual, I have 3 cards to reveal. We have a standard, a special, and an elite, and we will be going in order of rarity. So let's take a first look at the standard, the 4th Alabama. Look at the smile on this guy. He's so happy to be here. It is a 1 credit, 1/3 infantry, standard rarity of course, with Blitz, 1 operation cost, and it has the text, show when drawn, give your units +2 attack until end of turn. So show when drawn is one of the new mechanics of this expansion, and what it means is when you draw it from your deck at any point during your turn, or it could even be the opponent's turn if they force you to draw it, but when you draw it at any stage other than the mulligan, it will be shown to your opponent. There'll be like an animation that shows it to your opponent, they'll gain intel on it, and then the show when drawn effect will trigger. And this only triggers when you draw it, but if you can find a way to put it back into your deck and then you draw it a second time, it will trigger a second time. So it's a potentially very incredibly powerful effect if you use it in the right deck, and the effect on this particular card is give your units +2 attack until end of turn. This is a very aggressive effect for this card, and there's a few different ways to use it. So let's talk about a few of the different decks that you might want to run this card in, because let me tell you, this card is an absolute beast. So the first, and probably most obvious if you just look at the unit itself, would be a US frontline deck, typically US-German frontline, which is a fairly aggressive deck that can lean a little bit onto the mid-range, and essentially the idea of the deck is you stick a bunch of US units into the front line, you try to get there early, you try to hold onto it, and then you use cards like the M4 Sherman or Blitzkrieg to exploit the fact that you have control of the front line to deal the finishing blow to your opponent, or refill your hand and start gaining value out of cards that say if you control the front line. And this fits perfectly into it because a 1 credit 1/3 US unit with Blitz is the perfect unit for a frontline deck because it is a cheap card to get into the front line. It has a lot of health, so it's not going to be easily removed early into the game. And later into the game, it's a very cheap guy to get into the front line to trigger your M4 Shermans. So already, just on its own, a 1/3 body with any upside effect is something that you are going to consider playing in a frontline deck, and its upside effect is quite powerful because frontline does lack a way of actually doing a finisher move, but also this guy can just help you trade up with units. Like if your opponent plays down like an armor's train and you have a couple guys in the front line who can't really do a whole lot, and then you draw an Alabama, well, suddenly your guys might be able to 2-shot the train instead of 4-shot the train, and that is a substantial deal. Now, obviously, if you are running this in a deck that does not have any way of putting it back into your deck, or shuffling it into your deck, or putting it on top of your deck, or anything like that, it gets worse. Not bad, but worse. But if you play this in a deck that is built slightly more around it, and is able to run a lot more cards that sort of draw and put this back and whatnot. Those types of decks tend to be decks that go through a lot less units, and that means decks with lots of bombers, lots of artillery, or just lots of fighters, or cards that can spawn a lot of units at once. And the US has a lot of those, or pairs well as an ally for decks that can do a lot of those. So what I'm thinking here is you play this card in a US or a Britain US air deck, and then you put in 4 copies of Night Patrol, the 2 credit, draw 2 cards, put a card from your hand on top of your deck, and you have 4 air units in the support line. You throw a close air support down on them, and then you draw Alabama, and now that is 8 additional damage that is going straight into the HQ of the opponent. That is basically just, you control the board with your bombers and your deployment effects and whatnot, and a few of your orders, and then you just wait until you draw that Alabama, and then that's when you go in for the finishing blow. And you might draw the Alabama and you deal some damage and make some trades, and then you put the Alabama on top of your deck again with Night Patrol, and now your opponent knows you're drawing Alabama again. But what are they going to do? They still have to remove all of your units, or at the very least pin them. And there's also the possibility you do something like Night Patrol, put Alabama on, like you draw Alabama, you play Night Patrol, you put Alabama on top of your deck, you might draw a second one in the process of playing the Night Patrol, and then you play for Freedom on Alabama, and then you draw the Alabama. So for 3 credits, you have triggered Alabama on your turn. And 3 credits give you units plus 2 attack until end of turn. Is a, like, on-rate effect, but you're doing that when also, like, you're drawing cards in the process, you're getting the unit in the process, there's the possibility of putting it back onto the deck. It can't be countered by countermeasures. This is an incredibly powerful card. The other thing you might want this in is a Soviet USA artillery deck, or a USA Soviet artillery deck, where, you know, your entire, like 90% of your units are artillery, and artillery can attack anything on the board whenever they want, so giving them all plus 2 attack, very, very useful. Or you might run this with the sort of fighter Brewster spam decks that the US seems to be getting in this expansion, where you are summoning a lot of cheap little fighters, some in the support line, some in the front line. But the point is you are summoning a lot of units and you are going very wide, and the units are small, but not too small that they can be easily removed, and there's a few ways in US to buff their health up already, and if you run those plus Alabama, you can finish off your opponent very, very quickly. This card is very, very potent, and, like, honestly, probably in, like, the top 10 cards of, like, will probably be nerfed in the next year or two. If I'm being completely honest, this guy is an incredibly powerful card, and look at this guy's cheeky smile. You are going to lose to your opponent, like, top-decking Alabama, or they're going to play, like, Convoy and draw 2 Alabama for exact lethal, and that smile is just going to be looking at you as you see the defeat screen pop up. So that's Alabama. That's the standard. That is what we are working with here. That is the standard. We have 2 more cards to go, a special and an elite. So let's get to the special, and it is a Soviet special, the 312th Novgorod. This is a 4 credit, 1 operation, 2/7 infantry with a guard. And oh boy, does it have a spicy effect, because its additional effect on top of guard is add a 6th motor rifles to your support line whenever you convert 1 or more cards. So the 6th motor rifles is another card from the expansion. It is a 3/3 infantry with ambush and blitz. So this means that you can summon it in your support line when you convert a card, and then you can immediately attack with it or push it to the front line. And that's quite relevant. So it will help you defend the Novgorod, it will help you put on pressure onto your opponent. And the 6th motor rifles, of course, also has the deployment effect of drawing a card and converting 2 cards into your deck into motor rifles. This does not trigger because it's a deployment effect, and obviously that would then trigger Novgorod again and again and again, and it does not work like that. You just get the 3/3 ambush blitz body, but if it gets retreated in any way, then you can play it down again, and that will trigger the Novgorod because of the deployment effect, converting cards in your deck, and then also it still has blitz, and it will draw you the card. So this card is an incredibly potent tool in a convert deck, and a convert deck seems to be one of the archetypes that is being pushed. It seems to be best allied with Germany because of the Bergmann Battalion, the 2 credit, 2/3 Alpine infantry with blitz. that says whenever you convert one or more cards, draw a card. So this deck seems to be all about the motor rifles and applying pressure long term. So obviously you're running other stuff that can convert into other things, but the long-term goal of this deck is to essentially have it almost like Feigned Retreat-esque sort of win condition with just constant 6th motor rifles coming out at your opponent, and those are going to be 6th motor rifles from your deck that draw a card to replace themselves and create more in your deck, as well as from the Novgorod. So this is going to be triggering off of those 6th motor rifles. This is going to be triggering if you run something like the Jagdpanzer, the 3-credit 4/4 tank that converts cards in your opponent's hand whenever you make combat trades, and that can work with the Novgorod because you keep summoning units in your support line that can then attack, and then if they attack and kill a unit, it converts another card in your opponent's hand, and then summons another motor rifles in your support line that can then attack again. So there's some crazy snowball potential there, but all around this guy is just a must-kill for your opponent, and even if you don't have like an immediate pop-off with a ton of converts in your hand the turn you play it, it's still a 4-credit 2/7 guide, which is not insignificant if you're playing it on turn 4 against a deck like Jagro. Obviously, it could be hit by something like Raiding Brigade, or it could just be suppressed. So that is a worry there, but this card is incredibly powerful in the Convert deck, and I don't know how great the Convert deck is going to be, but I can tell you that this guy is going to be a monster in that deck. This is almost like the Tarnow division. Is Tarnow a division? Anyway, it's like the Tarnow of Convert. It is what Tarnow is to Legions, what Novgorod is to Convert. So, yeah, this guy is very, very powerful, and honestly, this is... I've spoken a lot about what direction Soviets are headed in this expansion, and honestly, Convert is looking like a pretty solid direction, and it might not necessarily be like tier 1 immediately, but it has the potential to be supported later down the line. It has potential to be hit with buffs, or it could also just have the potential to work well into whatever the other top decks are, or it just could have the potential to be better than we all expect it to be. Because there's definitely a few very powerful cards in there. Like 6 motor rifles gives you a constant source of draw and just pressure, to the ability to put pressure onto the board. Novgorod, if they can't be immediately answered, is just going to absolutely snowball out of control with constant 3/3 ambushes getting sent to the front line. And ambush is like not insignificant here. Like obviously a lot of the time your opponent's probably going to have like a 4 health thing to hit into them, but if you have a constant wave of these 6th motor rifles hitting the front line over and over and over, eventually your opponent's going to go down to 3 health or lower units that suddenly can't trade into your guys, and all of those are stopping them from actually reaching the threat itself of the Novgorod. So yeah, this is a very interesting card. There's a few different Convert cards across a few different nations. There's some Convert in Britain as well. So yeah, there's a few different ways you can try to pair this card in a few different decks. Like maybe you could run like a Britain-Soviet control deck, and you don't run that much Convert, and you run this guy primarily as a guard, because Britain does have some guard synergy, but you run enough Convert that you do sometimes trigger this guy. That's a possibility. All in all, I really love this card, and I'm going to be playing a lot of Convert. But let's get to the big card, the Elite. And rarity doesn't necessarily always mean how good a card is going to be, but it's certainly a test of a sign of how good a card, not how good a card is going to be, but how exciting a card is, how interesting a card is, and like how flashy a card is. So let's get to the Elite here. And it is an Elite for Germany, and it is Capitulation. So, an 8-credit order for Germany. All enemy units are converted into routed troops. So, this is essentially a full board clear for Germany. This is sort of like Depths of Winter meets Euron Project. So, Depths of Winter is obviously the 5-credit Soviet elite order that says turn all units on the board into light infantry, which are 1/1 0 operation infantry. And Euron Project is the tier 4 German research elite order that says 12 credits, destroy all enemy units on the board. And then I think you gain credits or something now. This is sort of in the middle ground where you're not destroying all enemy units. they still get units on the board. They still have the same number of units on the board as from before capitulation to after capitulation, but all of them are converted into routed troops, and routed troops is the 1/1 infantry token for this expansion that has 1 operation cost, so a pretty substantial differentiation from the light infantry. It can definitely mess up the curve of your following turn if you're needing to operate all these 1 operation cost infantry to just get them off the board to make room. And this card is absolutely insane, because Convert also gets through destruction effect, because you're not destroying the units, you are turning them into routed troops. So this is going to work as essentially a suppress and destroy, and then they get some light infantry, or some routed troops afterwards. They get some infantry, tiny little dudes on the board. But how big of a deal is that? Most of the time, not that big of a deal. It is slightly more of a deal for Germany because Germany lacks healing and it lacks guard. So generally, healing and guard are the things that make you say, I don't care if you have like a couple little dudes who hit me for a little bit of damage or just sit around on the board. What Germany does have is crossfire, though. So you play capitulation, and you could drop a crossfire immediately to fully wipe the board if you're like at 1 health. But you play capitulation, and then that's a whole lot of 1 health units on the board. And then once your opponent starts rebuilding the board, you already have the first trigger for crossfire. So your crossfire is already dealing 2 damage to everything. And generally speaking, later in the game, that 1 health is the hardest step to achieve on the crossfire. It's a lot easier to get things to like 2 or 3 because they might play a unit that has 2 or 3 health. But they're not really going to be playing a 1 health unit like in turn 10 plus. However, capitulation will set that up as well for an additional board clear on the following turn. So German control is getting a lot of good tools here. And this is obviously also has some synergy with convert stuff. If you have the Novgorod on the board, the card that we just showed, and you play capitulation, because this is a one-sided effect, you will also trigger the convert mechanic because you are converting troops into routed troops, or units into routed troops, so you will get the 6th motor rifles on the board as well. That's perhaps a maybe a bit more fringe way to play this card, but this card just fits into any German control deck, and even you could consider running this in some slightly slower German mid-range decks, because at 8 credits, it's expensive. It's probably going to be the most expensive card in your deck, but we've seen people run Leopold in mid-range decks before to great success, and this is kind of similar to Leopold in that effect. Now, Leopold obviously offers a threat on its own, but since the beginning, your opponent almost certainly would have an answer for Leopold the turn you played it. It was really more for the bounce effect. And with how much things have blitz and deployment effects now, Leopold has sort of fallen off the map because you don't really want to bounce all of their stuff necessarily, because they remove Leopold for like 3 credits and then they re-trigger all those deployment effects, and now they have all the units back on the board and you spent the entire turn playing Leopold. Now you can play capitulation, you remove all of the units, you remove all of their effects, you don't trigger any of the destruction effects, and then you still have 4 credits left over rather than 2 if you played Leopold, and that's a significant difference with letting you either play additional units or operating units you currently have on the board. And this is, we're talking about like your opponent has a huge amount of units on the board, and you play this to sort of reset the board. But this is a one-sided effect, so you could also be in a situation where maybe you have the slight board advantage, or at least you're like even on units on board as your opponent, but your opponent plays down a couple very high health guards in the support line, and then you just play capitulation and go into the HQ with 4 units in the front line. Like, this card is very flexible. This card is very useful in a lot of situations, in a lot of decks, and essentially the only thing stopping you from running this card is, am I consistently going to go to turn 8? Like, am I winning the game or losing the game before turn 8? That is, like, really the only reason you wouldn't run this card, but this is going to be run in, like, Germany-Finland discard, Germany-Britain discard, Germany-Italy control. This is going to be run in, like, Germany-US mid-range. If you have a slower version of, like, a German-Japan mid-range, and or if there's any, like, Germany-France gets a little bit slower, it's possible that they would run capitulation. And if there's any other new German archetypes or new German ally combinations that we see pop up after the expansion, they will almost certainly be running capitulation unless they're like an ultra-aggressive blitzkrieg type deck. This card is incredibly powerful, and within the scope of other elite board clears, like, this is less powerful than Depths of Winter. And like this is comparable to a few other cards that have been released, like for example Monsoon Rot as like a one-sided 6 credits, set the health of all enemy units to 1. That obviously doesn't remove them, but it sets you up to remove them very, very easily. And it's a one-sided effect. But really, the one card that I think it is worth comparing this to is Orb General Holler, which is a card from this expansion. It's the 8-credit Polish order that is convert target unit and adjacent units into routed troops. Intel 1. It's the same credit cost as Capitulation. That's a little sad. Like, I know that one's an elite, one's a limited, but like, Poland is an ally nation, man. We couldn't have had Orb Holler cost 7. I'm gonna die on that hill, but anyways, those are my 3 cards that I had to reveal today. I'm sure you all have been going crazy in the Premier chat if you watch this live, but if you're watching this later down the line, feel free to comment on the video, your thoughts on the cards. Is there anything that you think I missed in my evaluation of the cards? Are you excited for these? What's the decks that you're going to run these in? Comment all of that down below. Join my Discord link in the description if you want to have a more in-depth conversation over there, or more easily ask me questions, or ask for deck lists, ask advice, anything like that. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because I will be, of course, doing more reviews of the other cards that have been revealed leading up to the expansion, and I will, of course, be doing videos once the expansion drops, showing off different decks, sort of reviewing the best cards and the meta as it starts to take shape after the expansion drops. And again, the expansion drops on June 18th, so that is 2 days after the release of this video. So we are very close, and it will be coming out alongside a rotation and the balance patch. So a lot of stuff to look forward to coming up in cards. I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited about these cards. I'm very excited about the expansion as a whole. I hope you are all too. And I will see all of y'all in the next one.